my first degree was in liberal arts and in history. And as we mentioned, we've talked before, I got out of, I graduated and got out of school and couldn't get a decent job with a history degree, and I had to go all the way back and get an engineering degree. And I thought at the time, I just wasted 4 years on that history degree. But as I progressed through my career at NASA, I used my liberal arts degree and my history degree more than I used my engineering degree, because I was managing with, dealing with people. And history, I think, is a subject that gives you those critical thinking skills. You look at something like, how did World War I develop? And there's not one simple answer. There's a variety of different answers and underlying problems that may have been festering for years and years, decades, that just finally come to a head. And I think when you look at a problem, you have to understand that and look at those critical thinking skills. The ability to have a liberal arts degree and understand critical thinking skills, and particularly history. Not only the history and liberal arts give me a good ability to do critical thinking skills, it also gave me a good ability to write and communicate. I think those were advantages that I had at NASA that other engineers didn't have, and those were opportunity. I think we use that as an opportunity to kind of teach engineers the importance of those skills.
Welcome to another edition of Contra Minds. In this episode, we are speaking to Roger Forsgren. Roger was the Chief Knowledge Officer of NASA retired. He was the Director of Academy of Program, Project and Engineering Leadership at NASA. Roger is also an undergraduate with a liberal arts degree in arts and science, and a mechanical engineer and a master's in industrial engineering. Roger is also the author of 2 books, and the most recent being When Graduation is Over, Learning Begins: Lessons for STEM Students and Professionals. Roger in this episode talks about the importance of having a liberal arts background for an engineer. He talks about the foundational skills needed for successful engineers, where he believes that communication skills, decision-making skills, and working with people are as important as number crunching, knowing the math, and ensuring that the projects are done with efficiency and productivity. Over to my conversation with Roger. Hi, Roger. Thanks for joining our podcast once more. It's lovely talking to you.
Oh, it's always fun to talk to you, Swami. I enjoyed our experience the last time, and looking forward to this one for sure.
And the reason I thought this conversation made a lot more sense is because of the new book that you've published, Roger, and it really, threw a lot of interesting thoughts on, on the topic that you've chosen, which is learning begins after graduation for STEM students, right? And I think that's an amazing topic that I saw, and that's the reason I quickly wanted to have a deep dive and an interesting conversation with you. I'm sure there are a lot of insights that you're going to throw out of this conversation.
I hope so. I'm looking forward to it.
This episode is brought to you by Effortless. Effortless helps startups, small and medium enterprises manage money and compliance painlessly. If you're an entrepreneur, startup founder, or a small medium enterprise, getting access to a top finance mind is really difficult. They struggle today to track cash inflows, outflows, forecasting of cash flows, and the whole stack of finance is currently fragmented and broken. A lot of founders and promoters and their core team spend time manually tracking collections, vendor bills, raising invoices, making payments across various spreadsheets and mails and laptops and mobile phones and across multiple banking apps. This leads to poor financial planning, lack of finance data, and non-compliance, leading to penalties and problems for their business. You can take a demo of Effortless at goeffortless.ai and you will rediscover the joy of doing business while managing your finance seamlessly and effortlessly. Over to my conversation with Roger. So, Roger, when you thought about this topic, what was the reason you thought this was extremely important, and where do you think engineers really need to focus after the 4 years of graduation? And you really talk about the fifth year, right? So, therefore, talk to me about the fifth year.
All right, I'd be happy to. One of the things when I took over training at NASA is we kind of realized that our engineers are really good engineers. They know their numbers, they know their engineering, they know their science, but they had trouble communicating. And they had trouble, I think, what is commonly referred to as soft skills, being able to communicate, being able to work on a project team, being able to get along with others, and along those areas. So what I wanted to do, and what we did with the fifth year, is I wanted to see what the best way we could help our engineers become better engineers, and in the process help NASA become a better organization. So I gathered probably about a dozen engineering professors from around the world, and we met at the Kennedy Space Center. We actually met at the Astronaut Beach House, which is kind of a isolated beach house. It's been there since the Mercury and Apollo days. And we just kind of sat there for 3 days and we talked about if engineering were a 5-year degree rather than a 4-year degree, what would you teach your engineers? Because you've been through engineering school, and it's, proverbial learning through a fire hose. It's just, you're just overwhelmed with, the learning engineering, learning math, learning calculus, learning science. But what we wanted to do was see if you had the luxury of a fifth year, what would you teach your students? And as a group, we came up with just a unanimous consensus, and that was better communication skills, better ability to understand yourself as a person, and being able to work together on a team and feel comfortable working on a team, and also learning how to understand the kind of power that an engineer has and the ethics involved with that power. And just in these general and communication skills, of course, how to be able to communicate. Almost everything is done, proceeds forward and advances because you have to have communication. And one of the, I think, to me, one of the cardinal benefits that I got out of our discussion was when one of our engineers said that we have to understand that precision with words is just as important as precision with numbers. And that stuck with me forever after that, because it's really critical. If you can be the smartest engineer in the world, but if you can't express yourself in a meeting, or can't feel comfortable in a meeting, standing up and either advancing your idea or disagreeing with somebody's idea, if you don't have that self-confidence and that ability to express yourself, you're missing out a lot as being an engineer, because I think there's much more to engineering than just numbers and designing, circuits and that kind of stuff. There's an ability to really make yourself not only a better engineer, but a better person. And that was basically the whole idea of the fifth year. And after we had the discussion, it lasted 3 days, and we went back to the drawing board, my team, and we came up with a curriculum that would help meet some of these. Because I'd be honest with you, I'd be wasting my time if I tried to train NASA engineers in calculus or dynamics, or they know it already. Nobody would attend the courses. But I think when you and I'll tell you another thing that we did was, in the past, it's always been called soft skills. And I think that kind of turns people off, kind of turns engineers off. Soft skills, we know that, it's not we're supposed to be, more communicative. We're supposed to listen better and stuff like that. But what we did is we changed that to professional skills. And this is something I think is ideal for an engineer, because an engineer has a choice in their career, not just at NASA, but at any organization. You can be an engineer and just do the calculus, do the analytic surveys and designs or whatever. But if you want to move ahead in your career, if you want to become a manager, if you want to become a lead engineer or a chief engineer, you really have to develop those professional skills of communication, feeling comfortable working with other people, feel comfortable with yourself, and engineering ethics, making sure that the decisions you make are the correct type of decisions that are designed to be effective and to help people.
So, I would say US is really the melting pot of, building great engineers. And, some of the great innovations of the last 100 years have come from that country. And when you got these professors all over the world to come in and talk about the fifth year and talking about these professional skills, as you call it, why is it that engineers find it hard to really, develop these skills? Say, for example, the communication skills, the decision-making skills, working with people. So where do you think they hit a knot, if I were to call it, or a bottleneck? And why is it that this becomes a fundamental, block for them?
I think it has a lot to do because, in my experience, I think engineers have an analytical mind, and life is very easy for them when it's 1-0 on off, yes, no, where fluid flow can be measured precisely. But in life, you don't really have that opportunity, or you don't have that advantage, because human beings are probably in order to proceed and design things, your audience is going to be human beings, and you have to understand your audience before you design something. And human beings are a different breed. They're not as simple as machinery, and they're not as simple as calculus, believe it or not, because and they tend, engineers are very rational and logical and analytical, and the rest of the world really isn't. There's crazy things happening that don't make sense, but they continue to happen. And I think it's hard for an engineer or somebody with that mindset to adjust to that, or to even feel comfortable in that type of environment. So I think, in the book, I think one of the most perfect examples of that engineering mindset is Herbert Hoover. And I do a case study on Herbert Hoover. And believe it or not, he was a president that was in office in the United States right at the beginning where the Great Depression happened. And he's always had if you mention Herbert Hoover to somebody, they immediately think, oh, he caused the Great Depression. He was a disaster. But if you study his life, he was an engineer. He was the first engineer to become a president of the United States. He was a brilliant man. He was graduated from Stanford University, went out and made a fortune, retired at a young age over in London. He was referred to in the mass media as the great engineer, because he was like Elon Musk of today. Everybody knew his name and everybody respected him. In the outbreak of World War I, the British government and the Allies relied on him. He was such an incredible organizer, and he organized the food relief for Belgium and northern France, and negotiated with the Germans and the British to make sure the ships could get through the British blockade, and that make sure that the Germans wouldn't steal the food once it got there, and they would distribute it to the the population in Belgium. He came back to the United States, became Secretary of Commerce, completely reorganized the government, made it much more efficient. And everything he touched as an engineer, from an analytical standpoint, he did a marvelous job. And he was known as the great engineer. And he easily won he won election to become president in 1928. But as a president, you have to deal with people. And as a president, you have to deal with politics, and that's probably the worst side of people is politics. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't he couldn't lie. He couldn't even, he had a hard time talking to people. And one of his aides said, when he give a speech, it's like he's reading from a book. He doesn't even look up. But to him as an engineer, he's relaying the information to the people, and that's all he needs to do. He never felt the need to go out and shake people's hands and be comfortable with people. And because he didn't have these skills, and then when the Great Depression happened, when the stock market crashed, he looked at it as if it were an engineering problem to be solved. And so he started putting up these different gates and barriers and he's trying to apply engineering to economics. And economics is, just an outcome of people and market. There are no engineering rules to go with economics, and he tried to instill some, and made the Great Depression even worse. And to make things final, here's this man that was honored and considered one of a great engineer. He ran for re-election, and he was up against probably the most suave, most political type of personality, in the country at the time, and that was Franklin Roosevelt. Herbert Hoover went into this re-election thinking he was going to win again by another landslide, and he lost by the biggest landslide in American history. And after that, he was just kind of ignored and just put out, what they say, put out to pasture. I think he never could learn from his experience, and to me that is a viewpoint or a view of a person who has magnificent engineering skills, but doesn't have the people skills, doesn't have the professional skills to go along with it. And he was a perfect case study for the book. And I think any engineer that kind of can look at Herbert Hoover, and I'm an engineer, and I can reflect on his experiences and what he went through. And you say to yourself, well, why didn't you speak better? Why didn't you get more, go out there and shake hands and be comfortable with people? Well, he wasn't designed to do that, and he just couldn't get over it. And what I wanted to try to do with the fifth year program is to look at those potential Herbert Hoovers out there within NASA and teach them that you can become not only a great engineer, you can become a great leader, but you have to learn these professional skills. And sometimes, and for most engineers, I'll be honest with you, I think the professional skills are harder to learn than the calculus and the math and the dynamics and the thermodynamics and those type of subjects. So that was the goal of the fifth year program, and Herbert Hoover was kind of my model in designing it.
So if I were an engineer listening to this podcast and I want to develop my skills around the three areas that you talk about, which is really communication skills, decision-making skills, working with people, and talking with precision, as you call it, right? The use of words and the importance of precision of words. Where do I start? Because I'm already I've already graduated. This is not what I taught. That's what I'm taught in schools. I've always been told you're great in math. Okay.
Yeah.
And now I'm here. I've graduated, and I'm in this real world where I have to have these skills. So where do I start if I have to take incremental steps to get better at these skills?
Yeah, exactly. And that's that person that you described is exactly the audience I wrote for in my book. And I think engineers at NASA were at a real advantage because we had a training program that understood that and had the funding and had the managerial support, upper management support to develop those skills. A lot of companies can't afford that or may not have an interest in doing that. So I think the individual has to take it upon themselves to really become more of a, not only just use one side of their brain, but be able to use both sides of their brains. And I think you can start by just by being a little more patient with people and understanding that people and situations in life. I mean, we all, as an engineer, we all like to see things as black and white and, logical and rational, but they are in the test lab, and they are on the assembly line, and they are, when you're on a drafting board or a CAD computer designing something. But in real life, they seldom are, and you have to learn to adjust to that. And I think the liberal arts are a great way. Reading some great novels. I mentioned in my book about reading Moby Dick. Is reading 1,000 pages of Moby Dick going to help an engineer be a better engineer? A lot of people would say, no, that's ridiculous. I'm wasting my time. What do I need to know about hunting whales is going to help me be a better engineer? But when you put the time into a book like Moby Dick or any of the classics, I think it gives you a better framework of what life is really like, and what people are really like, and how you can motivate people, and what motivates other people, engineers and non-engineers. And I think, at NASA, we were at a real advantage, and I think our engineers soon understood that and took advantage of our fifth-year program. And but I realize that some organizations can't afford that. I think a starting point would be, my book, and I think I think you can go on from there. I think just learning how to communicate is probably, of all the professional skills, I think that for an engineer, that's probably one of the most important. And there's various clubs you can join where you learn how to speak, and you learn how to, even present a lucid and interesting PowerPoint presentation. So there's groups out there that you can, certainly learn from.
So therefore, so what you're really saying is go read a novel, go read a classic, and when you read them, you realize that there's nothing in black and white. Everything is in gray, right? So therefore, that's something that you then start to probably not even appreciate. You're a little bit shocked, right? Because whenever I read this various stories in the book, what I realize is, they're pretty much blind to many of these skills, right? So therefore, this whole engineering mindset, I'm not even aware that, this is something that, the pragmatism and the efficiency mindset, which you talk about, literally takes over, and you just don't get a sense of it, right? In this section, Roger talks about the importance of being precise with your words as much as being precise with your numbers. Most engineers are precise with their numbers, but they need to develop the skill of being precise with their words. He talks about the criticality of 3 skills that an engineer needs to develop. One is communication skills, the second being decision-making skills, and the third, working with people. He believes that if you want to develop these skills, one way is to read novels, look at reading classics, and this, he says, teaches an engineer about the world, about the people, how to inspire them. He knows more about the society, and that has an implication on enhancing these professional skills, as he calls it. How do I build that in my DNA? So what are the things? So if you ask me, how do I take my notes? How do I communicate? What are the little things, little tips that you will give to people to say, what, great, you told me to read a novel. Now, how do I, apply that in my learning? How do I apply that in my interactions with people? Can you explain how one needs to go about it?
Yeah, and you touched on something that I consider to be real important. That's an engineer's attitude towards pragmatism and efficiency. And we are trained we're born, I think, from day one, and it's further enhanced and trained us when we're in school. Got to be efficient, got to save time, got to save money, got to make sure that what you do is the most simple, but still the most well-designed product that you can have. And what I think for an engineer, the hardest thing to understand is sometimes efficiency isn't correct, isn't the correct approach. When you're dealing with people, sometimes you have to waste time. You have to sit down and talk to them and listen to them, and they might be going off on a tangent and might not make any sense to you, but you still, you have to understand that that's just the way they are. And if you're, if all you're thinking about is being pragmatic and being efficient, you end up being like Herbert Hoover, and you lose that touch. And I think one of the most important things you can do sometimes is waste time with a family member, waste time with a friend, waste time with somebody who's a customer, get to know them. And you're not going to, I think, you go to a gathering or a party or something like that. Most engineers are thinking, oh my God, I got to sit and listen to small talk and waste my time. I could be doing something more productive. But I think the idea is that you get to learn other people's experiences in life, and particularly if you're an engineer and your audience and your customers, you have to understand your customers. And one of the best ways to do that is to, believe it or not, waste time with them.
So you literally are saying, when you waste time, you discover a lot of things, and you discover the, what you call as the non, you become far more sensitive to people, is what you are saying, right?
Exactly.
In this section, Roger talks about the importance of wasting time. So what does he mean by wasting time? He says the world is not an efficient place, and as an engineer you should start appreciating and enjoying it. He says that there are times when everything is not about getting a task done. It's about sitting with people, talking to them about their life, what's going on, and the reason why they are behaving the way they are doing. And that really is about getting deep into a person's psyche, and that helps in getting the tasks done faster. So learn to appreciate that the world is not an efficient place. Learn to handle inefficiency. Learn to understand that everything is not going from a point A to point B, but you may go to point Z and come back to point B, and you need to start appreciating and enjoying that journey. So you're saying develop the power of understanding the vulnerability of people. Is that something that you're talking about?
That's absolutely it. And I think one of the core things that an engineer in our fifth-year program had to understand was the communication is critical, and it could be just in emailing and texting. I mean, most of our communication now not that way is done that way. I'll give you an example. I worked for the NASA chief engineer. From a technical standpoint, he was held the most responsibility in the entire agency. So you're talking, space probes and rockets and airplanes and everything he was involved in. And I could send him an email at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Saturday because something came into my brain, and I just sitting there and I thought, well, yeah, I'm going to share this. By 2:15, I'd get a response, no matter where he was. He could be in the headquarters building, and I knew there'd be an important meeting going on that he was either presenting or being part of. I could send him an email or a text, and again, he'd take time out to respond to me. And I really felt that I was part of the team that way. And he made me feel part of the team. He made me feel important. But I can tell you, as far as communication goes, and of course you have to learn how to write well and grammar, but there's also that timing aspect of it. I can send somebody an email. Maybe it might be a contractor that's working for me or a coworker, and I don't get a response for 2 days. Or I send a text out and I don't get a response. And I'm trying to think, well, did I say something wrong in that email? Did I upset that person? Did I, and there's a aspect of communication when a person doesn't respond. And I think a lot of young people, especially with text messaging, they'll read a text message and maybe they'll think, well, I'll get back to it later, and they never do, or they never respond. But the person on the other end has this feeling like, well, what I said wasn't important to you, or I'm not important to you, or you disagree with me, or you're angry at me. So there's like an underlying subtle way of communication that goes beyond the grammar and the being able to write well. That I think engineers and I think anybody has to understand that aspect of communication. That's critical. You have to understand the feelings behind somebody that's reaching out to you and taking a chance and asking you a question, and if you show up in their cubicle or their office 2 days later and say, oh yeah, sorry, yeah, that was a good email, thanks. Well, that doesn't cover it. So I think you have to be have that kind of professional skill. And I always admired the chief engineer for always being available. I don't care what time of day or night it was. It made me feel important. He may respond to me that he disagreed with something, but I got a response.
So what you're really saying is it's just not, how you present your ideas. It's also about the timing. It's also about how you express that empathy for the person on the other side. These are very, very important, and therefore necessarily that's something that you have to have a sense of, rather than just treat it like a flow chart and as an equation or as a formula, right? That's what you're saying.
That's exactly it. And you can get that kind of empathy when you understand people. And when you read Moby Dick, or you read some of the classics, or you go out and waste time with people, then you become you have a better ability to be able to communicate.
So in this section, if you carefully observe, he also talks about the importance of timing and being responsive. And that is an underlying unsaid language of communication between people. And he says if you respond on time and if you are responsive, it sends a message to people that they're a part of the team. And therefore, everything is not about, I did this task and so what's the problem? I've done it. But that's not how people look at relationships. People's relationships between each other are a lot more emotional, and you have to appreciate the importance of being responsive and ensuring you spend enough time. That has a big implication on building relationships and how work gets done. So you also make a very interesting point, Roger, that in the real world, at work, it's the extroverts who really win most of the time, and engineers by nature are introverts, and it's important that they become ambiverts, right?
Yes.
So that's a very interesting thing that you talk about. So therefore, if I'm an engineer and I'm able to relate to what you're saying, so as an ambivert, what are the things that I should be doing to transform myself from an introvert? I may not become an extrovert, for all you might know, but if I want to become an ambivert, what are the 5-6 things that I should be doing to start getting a little better being an ambivert?
Well, I think the first thing is understand that being an introvert, there's nothing wrong with being an introvert. There's a difference between introversion and shyness and psychological shyness, where you're afraid of people or where you're, but introverts, and a lot of engineers tend to be introverts. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is a skill, or it is a state of mind that you have to be able to deal with and understand. And once you understand yourself as an introvert and understand that, hey, that's just the way I am. I think that's the first step in becoming an ambivert. And being an ambivert, you're never going to really become an extrovert because you never feel comfortable like that. And the introverts, if you're on a project team, an introvert is, I think, some of the best people you can have on a project team because they think before they talk. If they don't say anything, a lot of times the extroverts think, well, this person's not paying attention, this person's not participating or something like that. But you have to realize that person's thinking it all out before they talk because they want to make sure that they make sense. They want to make sure that they contribute. So if you have an introvert, you know that you have somebody on your project team or you have several people on your project team that are introverts. You know that the data you get from them, it's going to be well thought out and it's going to be thorough and they're going to understand the problem or the issue that's facing them before they talk. And just like there's nothing wrong with the introvert, there's nothing wrong with the extrovert. But an introvert has to understand that extroverts are wired completely differently. Where an introvert likes to think before they talk, an extrovert talks and then thinks about it. So while they're thinking, they're talking, and for an introvert, that's like driving you crazy because you need the silence. You want to be you don't want to be a quiet area where you can think about things. And meanwhile, the extrovert next to you is talking what almost seems like nonsense to you because they're trying to organize their thoughts vocally before they actually think about it. So you have to learn to deal with each other, and I think that was one of the most important. We had a course at NASA. Designed specifically for introverts, and we welcomed extroverts to the course too. Just because you're all on a team, and you got to learn how to work together, and you got to learn how to accept each other, and so you got to find a middle ground. You're never going to become an extrovert. You never want to become an extrovert, but you got to become an ambivert, and that's where you got to just kind of decide. I have to loosen up a little bit. I have to understand the other team members, what they expect of me, and I have to be able to get out there and present my ideas and do a PowerPoint presentation. And if I have to fake like I'm being comfortable, you got to learn how to do that. Always in the back of your mind, you can realize that being an introvert, and there's various degrees of being an introvert, but if you're a real hardcore introvert, you still have to be able to communicate in front of a group, but you also can realize that, hey, this isn't going to last forever. I can get up and talk to people for an hour or two, get through this discussion, and I'll have my quiet time. I can go back and recharge my batteries afterwards. But you'll always have that opportunity to kind of recharge, regather your thoughts, and go back into your real self. But you have to be able to step out of your introvert shoes and get what we call be an ambivert. And if you want to be able to be successful, it's not easy. But I'll tell you another thing, especially for an introvert, that the more you do it, the more you're comfortable with it. And it's a learned skill, but it definitely is an important skill.
So you also make a very interesting point in a NASA meeting where these are engineers sitting, it's a very important decision being taken, and nobody disagrees, but all of them don't want to do it, right? Yeah. And it's a funny situation, and most of the time you see it in meetings, especially when you're dealing with an engineering mindset, an engineering culture. You don't say it openly that you disagree, but you tend to write it off in your mind, and then what happens, the subsequent impact has serious implications, as you write in the book, right? Mm-hmm. So how do I overcome that? Because it's not easy, because I may not agree with you, and it's out of sheer respect that I don't want to say anything, and then finally you end up not executing it, which has serious implications. So how do I balance that, Roger? And how did you make that happen at NASA?
Yeah, I think one of the classic case studies is that the Challenger decision, where I have a case study in the book about it, where one of the engineers he's a young engineer, he's brilliant. He knows that those O-rings won't survive in that type of cold weather, and they should never launch that. They need to wait. They could wait just 5 or 6 hours till the sun comes out and warms the launch pad a little bit. But management is so determined to move forward with this launch, and he tries to express his opinion, but obviously he's not successful. And the management tells him to take off your engineering hat, put on your management hat. And he goes and ends up going along with the decision to launch. And we all know the tragedy that happened. He's a young engineer. The rest of his life, he lived with that. Every day, he recalled that he was part of the problem, that he was not able to stop that launch. And what could he have done better? How could he have communicated his concerns better? How could he, from a communication standpoint, how could he communicate better? From an ethical standpoint, how could he said, just listen, here's my badge, I quit, I'm not going to be part of this. And all these things troubled him. He was a great engineer. He knew the numbers. He knew how to do all the analysis that an engineer needs to do. He thought like an engineer, and that was was kind of his downfall in that situation. He lived to regret it.
So how do you recommend he could have handled the situation in hindsight when you look back today?
Well, that's speaking in hindsight is always dangerous, and I talk about that. In the book, that it's the easiest thing in the world. I don't know, and I tell you, be honest with you, I think that's a terrifying thing for me, is I don't know how I would have done, how I could have done better. Maybe get more vocal. Maybe just try to be able to express yourself in a way that not hold anything back. Say, listen, this is going to cause an explosion if we do this. I know from my analysis that these O-rings can't withstand these type of temperatures, and you're taking a risk that is not only endangering 7 lives, 7 astronauts, it's endangering America's course in space and billions of dollars worth of hardware along those lines. It's something that might, touch an engineering manager a little bit better. But I think that's the terrifying thing is that you have to understand, and I think he's a great case study for especially for a young engineer, that you got to do your best to speak up, and you're given an awful lot of responsibility as an engineer, and I think a lot of engineers don't even realize that. Everything engineering does revolves around safety and the well-being of people, building bridges and things like that, and building rockets and airplanes and all those type of products. It all revolves around safety, and you have a huge responsibility. And if you see something that it isn't safe, or it causes a risk, I think engineers. Another thing is engineers are always think in terms of risk. And if you can prove along those lines that you're taking a risk to such an extent that if we do have a problem, it's going to be much worse than missing the schedule or paying an extra few dollars to fix a component, or taking the time out to repair a faulty sensor or something like that.
So maybe what you're really saying there is, rather than look at the efficiency and the power of the engineering design, if you focus on the risk, and therefore if you were to really talk about the risk of the wastage of money, the risk of because that's one other way of looking at efficiency, right?
Absolutely.
It's billions of dollars being thrown into the James Webb Telescope. So you're really looking at risks from a prudence, risk from protecting the company, risk from reputation. So these are
Exactly.
things which are very soft skills, I would say professional skills, which then people respect and then say, hey, he or she is making sense. So when you have that skill, you are able to then move from the rational to the the irrational side of the human values. And that's something that if you are able to shift your conversation, your ability to transpose yourself becomes very, very good, right?
Absolutely. And you hit on a perfect concept when it comes to risk, and that's an organization's reputation. And once you have a faulty product that gets out there, your customers, you might take the risk and think, okay, it could be a space shuttle, it could be a TV set, it could be a car. If you set something out there that might not be the best engineering in the world, and it's part of the steering or something, and that steering eventually goes bad after a year, and somebody's spent $20,000-$30,000 on your car, on your product, and they're the steering wears out. You lost a customer for most part. I mean, they'll never buy another car from you. And there's kind of a hidden cost in that risk that an engineer has to be aware of, and especially an engineering manager.
In this section, Roger talks about ambiverts. So if you are an engineer, mostly you are an introvert. There's nothing wrong being an introvert, and getting comfortable with working with extroverts is what engineers need to be ready for. And if you're an introvert, the ability to move a couple of degrees and become an ambivert, where your ability to express when needed, ensuring that you're vocal about your point of view, making that point of view not just in the meeting, but find context even outside the meeting, ensuring that it leaves an impact and therefore helps the organization and the team and the project teams make a decision is important. So if you're an ambivert, express yourself. Your ability to switch between these two states is important. That's a skill that engineers need to learn. Also, the fact that in meetings, if you develop the skill of being an ambivert, you at least make a point in the meeting saying, you know what, I believe this is a decision that I will go with. This is the way I think this project can be successful. And that is something that you need to develop and critical for your success in being a leader, and also ensuring that the management succeeds in the goals that they've outlined for the organization. The English units versus the metric units.
Yeah.
And it's a brilliant example of actually teams working. And can you tell that story on, I think there would be everyday stand-up meetings, there would be status updates, and yet there is miscommunication, and yet there is no clear communication between these teams, which led to a huge disaster. Yeah. So how come how do you really stop such I would say miscommunication, or lack of understanding of what one team is doing versus what the other team is doing? So talk to us about that story, its implications and the learnings.
Yeah, that was the Mars probes back in the 1990s. That's when NASA decided that they were going to start moving towards exploring Mars, and spent a lot of money, a lot of engineering on. And nobody in the past has ever been able to really routinely land something on the planet Mars. It's very difficult to do. And they came up with these probes, and they had teams working across the country. One team was dealing in metric units, and the other team was dealing in English units. And this is a good example that here's this probe is probably the most technically advanced piece of hardware ever built, and it worked. But its problem came from not from a difficult technical standpoint. It came from the most simple situation that could have been, something that was overlooked, and that was that one team was using metric and one team was using English units. And sometimes an engineer, or certainly a project manager on a team like that, has to understand that I think it's a perfect example where engineers get the engineering right. They designed and built this probe, but they didn't get the communication and the professional skills right, and being able to communicate and work together as a team, like you mentioned. And what happened was the probe got to Mars, and they're getting ready to land, and the team back at I believe it was JPL was wondering, oh, they're getting these weird readings, like we should be on the surface by now, and all of a sudden they lost communication. And then the team, management team was gathered afterwards and discovered that the flaw is that one team was using metric and one team was using English, and they overshot Mars, and the probe was never seen again, and there's $1 billion down the drain. And that goes back to our discussion earlier about your reputation. That up to that point, NASA had landed on the moon, people on the, 7 times we sent astronauts to the moon. We developed all this incredible hardware, and all of a sudden, we make a mistake like that. I mean, that in the past, when we made a mistake, it was just some kind of incredible technical thing that most people, most of the taxpayers in America and the media people didn't really understand. They figure, well, it's so incredibly technical and difficult that, we'll give them a little bit of leeway on an accident like that. But when it comes to something as simple as a third or fourth grader should be able to understand the difference between metric and English units, you end up your customer base, your taxpayers, all of a sudden start to lose faith in your ability to do your job, and your reputation suffers. And I go into the case study. NASA became kind of a late night TV talk show joke for several years, and it took us years and really it's changing the entire NASA culture before we were able to change that.
The other thing, Roger, I found very, I would say, provocative and very, very impactful was this example of understanding the intent that you talk about. In the the Abraham Lincoln's case of the general giving discretionary powers to his general, right? And this discretionary power almost sends a message of an intent, and the person on the other side understands the intent. And this is a very important non-verbal method of understanding what my boss wants, what my manager wants, what my leader wants. Can you talk to me about how important is that, and how do you build this sense of intent between people?
That's a tough question, and I think it's particularly if you're going to manage a team of engineers. I think it's important that you're an engineer yourself, because you not only from the technical standpoint, so you can understand the data that they're giving you, but I think you have to also understand people, and that's the whole basis of why I wrote the book. And that people, even engineers, sometimes aren't completely rational. That they have their own unique outlooks. They have their own unique idiosyncrasies that you have to understand and deal with, and you have to develop a culture, a teaming culture, with your group, with your project team. So that they understand what the goal is, and what your goals are, and what your limits are, and what their responsibility is, and what you expect from them, and what they can expect from you, and your ability to facilitate their job, make their job easier, and just so that it's kind of weird. A project team is made up of people, and that they're all completely different machines, but as a manager you have to be able to make those like gears work together and make sure those people understand each other, and we focused a lot on that at NASA, how to develop not only how to develop leaders, but also how to become a good team member, and that's where it goes back to our discussion earlier about you can be an introvert, but you can still be a critical part of a team. And same thing, you can be an extrovert and still be a critical part of the team. It's just getting them to be able to work together.
So, which brings me to a very important point in today's software companies, right? This thing about teamwork sometimes is overdone, right? Because I'm able to communicate well. I go out for lunches. It all looks like we are all communicating very well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you contrast that with being objective yet being people focused? How do I balance that?
Yeah, that's difficult. I think it's particularly difficult for an engineer. I'll give you an example. When I would have my engineering cap on at a meeting early on, say we had an issue or a problem on a project team, and on Friday I'd go home and I think, well, I'm going to think about this over the weekend. Monday morning I always had a team meeting, and where we'd come up with, we'd make decisions. But all weekend it would be bothering me and festering in my mind. I'd be thinking about it. And by Sunday night, I had a solution. This is the way we're going to do that. And then I go into a meeting, and I would say, okay, here's the problem. What do you think about it? And I would end up defending my own thought. And I had already made up my mind before I went into the meeting. And I think you have to learn how to prepare yourself to be much more open and much more understanding. And another thing that I found with project teams is to have a diverse project team is critical, because if everybody on my team is a mechanical engineer, when we come across a problem or an issue, we're all going to come up with the same solution. Basically, because that's our mindset. But if I have somebody that's involved with, different phases of engineering, of systems engineer, electrical engineer, if I have people involved from finance, if I have people involved that don't know engineering at all, but are product testers or things like that, I get a different viewpoint. And all of a sudden, you have to have that. That's the real strength of having a diverse team, is having different viewpoints. And the other thing is being a manager that's has the ability to be objective and to listen to these and think, well, maybe I wasted my whole weekend thinking about this because this person over here came up with a solution in about 5 minutes because he's dealt with it, or he or she's dealt with this before, or understands it, the problem better than I do.
In this section, Roger talks about intent, and intent is about body language. It's about the unsaid. Most engineers don't give so much of importance to what is being unsaid or the body language. When you give away an unsaid message or a body language to your team, what then happens is they pick up the unsaid, they pick up the intent behind what you did not say. They get empowered and they feel that they just have to go out and do it. Therefore, the need for having to understand sometimes what not to say, what to say, how to say it also ensures how projects, accountability and responsibilities are taken by teams, and they just go out and deliver for success. This is something that the 3 skills that Roger talks about helps you build. The next one is about overcoming biases. When you work with people, you quickly come into a decision, and it's almost like an engineering problem where a formula is applied and quickly the solution is thrown. But that's not how the people around you take decisions. There's a bit of a bias that you have to leave behind. And finally, he talks about critical thinking. Always an engineer believes that for a problem, there is a root cause, and if you solve the root cause, the problem will get solved. If you look at it holistically, there are several underlying problems. If you touch one, there are other dependent issues that are there, and therefore ability to see it holistically, that's a skill that you need to work on and start improving as you move up your career. So as an engineer, this brings me to the next question. How do I overcome biases? You talk about several biases, right?
Yeah.
Lovely points that you make there. So walk me through, how do I overcome those biases?
Yeah, the first thing is to recognize those biases and to understand that gosh, they're built into your brain. That's just the way your brain's functioning. So you have to kind of sometimes outsmart your brain, and that's to sit down and reflect after when you're trying to come to a decision. This is why I always try to, as a person, and we also taught this, is to not make snap judgments. I think that's the worst thing you can do, because then you're using your emotion most of the time to come up with okay, this is the way we're going to do it, and you're not giving yourself that opportunity to sit back and reflect, or sit back and listen to other people's viewpoints. And I think for under and there's I think I probably list 10 of the most common biases that I come across at NASA in my decisions. But there's a whole bunch more of them. But the ones that I stress in the book, I think, are more in line with the type of biases that an engineering brain might have.
Absolutely. And therefore, to overcome those biases, how would you overcome those biases? So is it about not jumping into conclusions? Is it about slowing down? Is it about sleeping over the points that are being made? Sometimes it is also about because you have a certain judgment about a person, you have a bias, right? So therefore, some of these things come into play, and therefore, so the ability to move from objectivity to I would say subjectivity to being neutral is a very important shift in your brain that you need to keep doing if you really are wanting that fifth year I would say graduation that you were talking about, right? So I think that not very, very important if you really want to be somebody as a leader, somebody as a great engineering leader? Is that not important? And is that something that I should practice and build as an engineer? Would you recommend that?
Oh yeah, and I think what you're getting at is critical thinking skills, and having that ability to look beyond the obvious. And I think in the book I give a couple of case studies about that, where you have to look at the entire system, when you're dealing with a problem. And I think critical thinking skills give you that ability, and they're not easy. And I think one of the benefits that I had, my first degree was in liberal arts and in history. And as we mentioned, we've talked before, I got out of, I graduated and got out of school and couldn't get a decent job with a history degree, and had to go all the way back and get an engineering degree. And I thought at the time, I just wasted 4 years on that history degree. But as I progressed through my career at NASA, I used my liberal arts degree and my history degree more than I used my engineering degree, because I was managing with, dealing with people. And history, I think, is a subject that gives you those critical thinking skills. You look at something like, how did World War I develop? And there's not one simple answer. There's a variety of different answers and underlying problems that may have been festering for years and years, decades, that just finally come to a head. And I think when you look at a problem, you have to understand that and look at those critical thinking skills. The ability to have a liberal arts degree and understand critical thinking skills, and particularly history. Not only the history and liberal arts give me a good ability to do critical thinking skills, it also gave me a good ability to write and communicate. I think those were advantages that I had at NASA that other engineers didn't have, and those were opportunity. I think we use that as an opportunity to kind of teach engineers the importance of those skills. But I don't want all our engineers to go. I don't want all our engineers to go back and get a history degree. We just wanted to teach some courses in communication and critical thinking skills. And to be honest with you, that's why I wrote the book. It was a culmination of.
So tell me, Roger, my final question. As I read this book, a very interesting point that you make is the importance of judgment.
Yeah.
Okay, for an engineer. So how was judgment different from decision?
Yeah, and this is a tough one. And I talk about judgment in the chapter in the book about engineering ethics and morality. And I think a lot of times in society we're told, well, don't be judgmental. Don't judge a person. Don't judge a book by its cover. Don't, and but when it comes to morality and making a right decision, an ethical decision, you have to draw a line, and you have to say, yeah, I'm not going to cross this line. And in order to draw that line in the sand, you have to make a judgment. You have to say, you might not agree with me, but I don't think this is the proper way to go. And and making a judgment is never easy because 50% of the people are most likely not going to agree with you. But you have this built-in concept within yourself, your conscience, that's already making judgments for you. And it can be the way you were raised, or the way you're, what you're, how you're were raised as far as religion goes and things like that. You have to make a judgment, and you have to stick to it.
So Roger, so if I were an engineer and saying that I have the next 2 decades, and I'm a young engineer, I've got the next 2 decades to really grow in my career, what skills do you think, now having done a full round of what you have done, what would you recommend to me, saying which skills are very, very important for me and I should go about mastering those skills? Give me the top 3 or 4.
Well, I think we hit on them in our discussion and in the book. I think communication is critical, and you have to learn how to be able to communicate. Precision with words is just as important as precision with numbers. You also have to understand, and I think a lot of engineers don't understand how much power they really have from an ethical and from a moral standpoint. They're just looking at hardware, they're just looking at numbers and data, but that data translates into a product or a system or a process that people are going to use. And there's so many different case studies where engineers didn't understand just really the kind of risks that they were taking, and people's lives were affected by that. And in the book, I talk about Albert Speer. He was always I was always fascinated with like I said, I majored in history, and even as a young man growing up, I read his books, and for the life of me, I couldn't understand how could such an intelligent person, how could somebody, just a brilliant engineer, incredible organizer, how could he allow those skills, to be used by Hitler and the Nazis by some estimates, he prolonged the war by an extra year just because of his ability to transform the German economy even while they're getting bombed. Brilliant man, but he did 2 things. I think ethics and morality were too difficult for him because he was an engineer, and ethics and morality, there's no right, there's no black and white. There's always a gray area there that is confusing, and I think most engineers think, well, I'm not going to bother with that. And I think Albert Speer did that, and just it's not his concern, morality or ethics. He's an engineer. He loves doing engineering. That's what he's going to do, no matter if he has to make a Faustian commitment to the devil. He did that just to be an engineer. That's certainly his example is on a grand scale, but it's every engineer designing the brake system for a car, or designing the wing of an airplane, or designing the electrical circuit for a television set, that you have that. You're actually producing magic to most of the world, because most of the world doesn't understand when they turn their computer on how this thing lights up and can find my files from 3 years ago on a hard drive somewhere. It's all magic to them, but to an engineer, it's just a part of our daily life. And that with all knowledge comes power. And another example in the book has to do with Volkswagen and Dieselgate. where
Yeah.
engineers use their power to try to trick the regulators in this country on diesel emissions. And they're using their ability to write software in a way that was hurtful.
Yeah. So therefore, what you're really saying is learn the communication skills, learn precision with words, think of dealing with grace, be ready to accept there is inefficiency when you manage people. Look at critical thinking skills, because there are no right answers for many of the complex problems that you'll be thrown at when you're at work. So these are things that you start learning after graduation, and that's really what I think engineers need to be cognizant of, and then start applying and developing these skills. Would that summarize the essence of what you would like to see what engineers build in themselves?
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely, Swami. You hit the nail right on the head.
In this section, Roger talks about the difference between judgment and decision. And judgment has a certain qualitative aspect to it, which is how do I go about finally taking action? But as you're taking the action, have I considered all aspects before I take the decision? For example, is it the most efficient way of doing it? Is this the best way of doing it? Am I saving enough money if this decision is implemented? Is it most ethical? Is it the best way to get this done? And am I ensuring that there is ethics in the decision making? So a judgment has got several factors, and when you are on a project, or when you are building a product, or when you're doing a task, and finally the outcome is something that you measure, several aspects of this as an engineer you need to look at. So it's not just the math behind it, it's not just the number behind it, but it's about judging several key aspects of how you look at people, how are you dealing with people, what's really the culture behind getting things done, how does it stand to test in terms of ethics. All this is finally how you need to make a judgment, and therefore mixing the qualitative and the quantitative aspects is where you differentiate between a judgment and finally taking a decision. He then summarizes that the great engineers of the future will need to take cognizance of the fact that they are great in their number crunching skills, they are brilliant in using the left brain, but what's important is these three skills which will become foundational for their success. One, the communication skills. The second is the decision making skills, and the last one is working with people. Your ability to mix the IQ with the EQ will stand the test of time for your success as an engineer in your career. Thanks a lot, Roger, and it's lovely talking to you. And as always, many of the points that you said were not just points which needed to be noted down, but points that needed to be absorbed, practiced, and you need to really reflect on it, and then start, it must play in your daily behavior. I think that's really what I think you talk about, and that's really how it appealed to me. Thanks a lot, and lovely talking to you.
Thank you, Swami. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Good luck.
Thanks for listening to this episode. For selected links and detailed show notes, visit www.contraminds.com/blog. Follow ContraMinds on social media and let us know who you would like to see next on the podcast. If you're listening to Contra Minds on Apple Podcasts, do share your comments and give us a rating. We are keen to know what you're thinking. Contra Minds is also on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and stay up to date on all our releases. Thanks for listening and stay safe.